recently read a book entitled Three Women. My typical reading repertoire consists of theological commentaries, academic textbooks that are assigned in my MPA classes, Vogue when I need some mindless flipping, and plenty of Elephant and Piggy books, which are courtesy of Maddie, who makes sure that the humorous genre is included in my repertoire. As of late, I haven't had a lot of time for pleasure or interest reading. However, I do love to read. And so the other day, I caught the tail end of an interview with the author of Three Women. Her name is Lisa Taddeo, and her book was being released in the upcoming week, and so she was on the show promoting it. Her motivation for researching and writing the book captured my attention. Human desire. Specifically, she centered her decade of research exploring female sexuality and female desire. Her work considers the fragility, complexity, and inequality of female desire, which piqued my curiosity, mostly because I'm a woman, but also as a person. The subject of how we engage the world as sexual beings is hardly talked about in ordinary conversation. Desire and want and how it is expressed is often only spoke of in hushed tones, in scandalous gossip, with shaming overtones, or in the safety of a therapist's office. Somehow, desire is a bad thing. And yet, it is God who creates us with desire, with inquisitiveness, with impulses, and with a need to connect. If I think about all the things that have occurred in my life, things that have been done to me, it is clear how much pain we can inflict upon another person by misusing, exploiting, or abusing desire. For me, personally, at some low point in my life, I decided that I would not be a woman who needed these things. These things were dangerous. These things broke people. And so I would need less. I would desire less and less. And plus, who was I to want or desire? If the three women in the book exhibit too much desire, then I would have been the opposite. I'd have been the fourth woman in the book. Often we see, hear about, or experience the two extremes, denying our desire or being driven by it. Now, there is no denying that some of my past painful life experiences have shaped my interest in the subject of human sexuality, why we do what we do, and act the ways we do. But I basically had no intention of ever talking about this book or the subject in a sermon. I mean, it's not every day your pastor stands up in here and says, let's talk about human desire. But then God goes and says something like, how great is the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah, and how very grave is their sin. And we all know what their sin is, right? Desire, want, sex. That's what most people will say. And eyes narrow in on the immorality of it all, hearts harden against those who identify as homosexual, and suddenly sex and desire have become the downfall of humanity. In recent years, many commentaries and sermons have explicated how this story isn't really about the sinfulness of homosexuality, which is true. But this isn't going to be a sermon on the subject of homosexuality and how that experience can be life-giving and good for some. The church in general has spent a lot of time as of late explaining whether homosexuality relationships are sinful or not. However, in that conversation, we somehow skipped over talking about sexuality as a whole. Why is this? I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And just as an aside, I fall firmly in the homosexuality is not a sin camp, but that is, as I said, a whole different sermon. Often we boil human desire down to sex. Sometimes desire and want are expressed sexually, but that doesn't make them one and the same. What I think is really tricky, delicate, if you will, within the context of theology is this notion that desire, emotional, spiritual, and physical, can be good, that it's normal, that it helps to make us whole. However, so often we hear stories of how desire and want are the ruin of people. As illustrated. Here you go. See ya. Just a little lefty in the section. So often we hear stories of how desire and want are the ruin of people, which is illustrated right in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. Men have come into the cities, banged on doors, demanded they have their way with strangers, and exerted power over everyone. And Sodom is raped by power and desire, and left for ruin. The needs, desires, and wants of the men are abusive. There's just no other way to say it. The men in the story take what is not theirs to take. What the stories of the three women in the book does flawlessly is provide perspective and insight into reckless, painful, tender, and almost incomprehensible decisions that are made by the women and for the women. Through the unfiltered lens of the book, we see their desperation and their loneliness. The women are simultaneously thrilled and tormented by desire. And they pretend to want things they don't want, so nobody will know that they're not getting what they need. I mean, why is this? How is it that desire, something I believe was intended as a good gift from God, has become so twisted? Maybe there's not an answer exactly to why, but I think that our desires and our wants can tell a story about what is missing and what has happened. How we express desire has the potential to light us on fire or burn us to the ground. For good or for ill, our desires tell something about who we are. Now, before I go any further, let me say, if you decide to read the book, Three Women, because I have mentioned it, let me first say that it is rough and graphic. Not in an inappropriate way, but in a raw, emotional, frank, fleshy way. And as fair warning, the language is strong. It is not G-rated. The book isn't what I expected. Had I known what I was getting into, I might not have read it. But I'm glad I did. Now, it's true that the three women whose stories are narrated led lives and had relationships that are very different from my own. But what isn't different from my life, what isn't different from the circumstances in Sodom and Gomorrah, what isn't probably very different from your own lives is this. The heat and the sting of want and desire expose the rawness of humanity, the exquisiteness of it, and the pervertedness of it. From God's perspective, our sexuality and our desire is designed to reconnect us to the world, to each other, and with God. And I believe that there is a godly way of living out desire. If this is true, that desire is a gift from God to connect us, then our sexuality and God are inextricably intertwined. They cannot be separated. Maybe that's why God is so broken when Sodom is raped and ruined by desire and power. The abusers have also pillaged and ravaged God. And God is left lying there crying and wondering, how on earth did this happen? One of the saddest elements of the book is all three women aren't comfortable in their own skin for a myriad of reasons. Their bodies don't feel right to them, their needs are unanswered, and because of the lack of love and closeness in their lives, they have turned in on themselves. They can't even truly connect with themselves, let alone God or another person in a healthy way. And I think what's important about this book is that it cuts straight to the heart of longing. And they can't see themselves as God sees them, and so they settle for someone, anyone, to see them. They use their sexuality to be seen and to feel. The men of Sodom use it for power and domination. The media uses it to make money and superficial worlds. And all of this seems to thrive on a deep dissatisfaction with life. We can't talk about sexuality and desire without talking about how we are made, which inevitably leads us to who made us. God is integral to sexuality. Sex, desire, God, and humanity, they're all connected. Our humanity embraces many things that are extensions of our sexuality and desire, not just physical acts. Things that are essential to our souls. Things like beauty and body and sensuousness and touch and intimacy and friendship. Our souls thirst for these things, which is just a theological way of saying we have desires and wants. I believe in this day and age it's important for us to consider the truth that how we express our sexuality is an extension of our connectedness with God and our longing for being known. Every encounter is loaded with potential to change the world and to change us. The book may be entitled Three Women, but I believe it could be called Every Person, because we all desire this connection and heat and closeness and intimacy, to be fully known and still loved, still embraced, still accepted. And while it may seem small and may even sound unbelievable, that is the promise gifted to us in Jesus. Jesus is God coming to us in love. Sheer, unadulterated, unfiltered love, stripped of everything that could get in the way. Naked and vulnerable, hanging on the cross, just to say, I love you, accept you. And God waits with open arms for you. It's pretty profound that God desires us.